all the societal turmoil happening, and he retreated within himself. When really the reality is you were making stuff that can fit in your truck.
Oh, sure. Well, I also teach, AP art history. Okay. And that's, where we started. Like, well, hey guys, why do you think the Venus of Willendorf can fit in your hand, right? Within 4 or 5 answers, they'll get like, well, maybe they were nomadic, Yeah. And so, if you're traveling, if you're following your herd, if you're following your food source and you can only carry so much in your bag, you're not going to have some sort of megalith that you're going to be carrying with you, unless you're, like Asterix and Obelix, I think you would carry, right?
We romanticize so much, and, the reality is historical figures are dealing with the same circumstances of life that, individuals now deal with, just in a different form,
Sure. Well, and I hear, I try to listen to a lot of podcasts, artists out of New York, and a lot of times part of their story is, they're stuck in spaces in New York where, hey, the best thing I have that serves as a studio right now is my bedroom.
Yes.
And so right now, I'm producing 6-inch square work because that's, what I have the capacity for, versus, someone that is in a different, And so it challenges you to work differently, right? Yeah. A good painting isn't, there are plenty of great paintings that will transport you that are tiny, right? Scale is not a problem. But, there is something... that's transporting about really large scale work when it envelops you, right? It's one thing to see a Rothko on Instagram, and it's a different thing to be in front of a Rothko in, the color kind of wash over you.
And this is true, this is really true of any creative endeavor, is that there are benefits and detriments to the place where you are, but it colors your creativity. So I would say, even in the creative enterprise of curatorial work, there are projects that I will work on here that I wouldn't have conceived of or understood had I lived anywhere else. I mean, one of the shows that I did here was based on the permanent collection, and it really was a personal reflection on the fact that when I moved here, I was completely freaked out by the fact that I could see in all directions. This is just not in my experience, right? So I'm from suburban New York, from a community that was designed by Frederic Law Olmsted, who is the landscape architect who is the master of deception, right? Central Park is a really narrow strip in the middle of Manhattan. You feel like you're in the middle of a forest, very much on purpose, because he's changing the topography and he's putting trees in so that you can't see far into the distance. So I get here and I can see everywhere, and I feel as though I'm going to fall off the face of the earth. And I had this conversation with my colleague who grew up in Oklahoma, and he said, I feel exactly the opposite, and I feel that I'm going to fall off the face of the earth when I'm in New York, when I'm hemmed in. And so I thought, well, let's look at works from the collection that have to do with the horizon, and where the artist places the horizon line really has an effect on how you perceive the space.
Absolutely.
In this case, prints, watercolors, drawings, and photographs. And I think my goal is, if I can create an exhibition that's not really about, that's where the concept is not unique to this exhibition, but rather something that people can bring to their experience of looking at art going forward, that's a win. So if I can sort of set up the dynamic of, I've been thinking a lot about the horizon line and what it means to different people and what it means in artistic expression, and so that every time someone goes to the museum from now on, they're starting to look at the perspective of the artwork. That's a really cool and powerful opportunity for me. I may never see the people who have been influenced that way, but I know that it happens.
Yeah.
Or I hope that it happens.
Yeah. In my introductory painting class, we'll start with landscape, because it's probably the most forgiving, right? Yeah. Because if you start with a portrait, if something's a quarter inch off, well, it's not the person you're you're painting it's their long lost cousin or something, right? But with a landscape, I find that it's really forgiving. And one of the things I talked to them about, hey, I want you to find, bring in, something that as a reference for your landscape, and think about that horizon line. If that horizon line is higher, it's really going to be about what's going on in the foreground. If that horizon line is lower, it's really going to be about the sky, which something that's really unique to this part of the country is especially in the spring and this time of year is some of the skyscapes that we're able to get here. And but yeah, it's big sky country. So you grew up in suburban New York.
Yeah.
You go to Williams College.
That's right.
You loved it. You thought it was so nice. You went there twice.
That's exactly right. Yep. I graduated from Williams, and I had the notion that I wanted to teach art history, the college and university level, and I went directly from Williams into a PhD program, and so very much set up on a conventional path so we would think that this story just resolved itself in the normal in quotation marks curatorial way, but it didn't.
Right.
So I showed up at the PhD program, and my professor, who was one of the great art historians of American art, left for family reasons. And so here I am on week 1 of my PhD program, and it's unclear to me whether there's going to be a program in American art. And so I spoke to a number of people I considered mentors, and they said, come back to Williamstown and regroup. And you don't want to be in a doctoral program that where you don't have an advisor. And so I moved back to Williamstown kind of with no clue of what I was going to be doing, and the director of education of the museum went on leave. And so I said, okay, well, I don't have anything else to do. I can come in and fill in for the director of education. And it kept happening. I suppose, I hope I'm not a jinx, but the head of PR went on leave. And so I did PR and the website and created press releases, both for real, and like when the toilet would break, I would do these press releases for the toilet or make a label for it, and just be like mixed media, unknown artists, that kind of stuff. And I enjoyed every aspect of museum life, and ended up reapplying to graduate school unsuccessfully. It was just a time in American art that like everybody was retiring or leaving, and there were just no mentors. And really, my understanding was, you don't want to be in a doctoral program unless you have someone really guiding your path. And so I ended up working for an internet company and loving it. And basically my job was defining what it means, what is a community. So we were working with mom and pop internet service providers,
right,
and providing them with local news through to their subscribers as a free add-on to their internet service, which sounds like now like mom and pop internet companies. What
I remember.
It was an idea that was very short-lived.
Yeah.
And so the notion was, how do you figure out if you live in Fort Worth, do you care about news that's in Arlington? Is Mansfield in the same newsletter?
Right.
How do you sort of get at that? And so I started my own department, which was basically like market research. And I would call librarians, and I would call supermarkets, and I would cold call people in these communities and say, look, if there's a football game in Bedford, do you care? And try to get at like what constituted a community for these newsletters. And, I call it my quarter life crisis. At the time, I rode a Vespa and wore leather pants and ironic t-shirts. And I just thought okay, if I can't do art history, which is what I thought I was going to do, maybe I have to figure out something else. And at the time, this is like a very long route to getting back to art history. But at the time, I had a colleague, friend, actually from Texas. So she could have predicted all of this.
Right.
So a friend and a colleague who had been a chef and was our head of business development for the internet company. And she said, really, all I want to do is open a restaurant. And I said, you know what? What I wanted out of art history was really this idea of shaping a place and creating an environment and teaching and understanding people, and comes from like a real interest in what makes people tick.
Sure.
And I think it would be great to open a restaurant, so let's do it. So I quit the internet company. It was about like 2 weeks before everybody got laid off and got unemployment, but I didn't because I had quit. I quit the internet company, and we worked on a business plan to start a restaurant. And she, at the last minute, got cold feet and took a pass. But we are still friends to this day, and it was totally okay, because you don't go into that half-heartedly.
Right.
And so at that point, basically, and so I'm still in Williamstown. At that point, basically, I decide I need a 9-to-5 job, because my passion was art history, then my passion was to open a restaurant, and now I'm out of passions.
Right.
And so I just basically said I like living in the Berkshires. It's a really good quality of life. And part of me, I think, wanted to be in college forever, so it was just basically, that was a way of doing it without schoolwork. And so I applied for basically every job that had to do with people, writing, communications at the college.
Right.
And finally ended up with a job in the development office doing fundraising. Started out communicating about complicated tax maneuvers, which I didn't understand at all, but I figured if I can understand them, then I can convey them to other people. So a lot of writing, a lot of human interaction, a lot of what makes people tick. And people would say to me, if you could have any job going forward, what would it be? And I said, well, I think it would be a combination. I had never really thought about museums. I had only really thought about academia as it related to art history. And working in administrative capacity, I started to understand, there's something here. So well, if I could do anything, I would be the head of development for an art museum, because then it would combine the art history and the love of art and the belief in what museums do with the fundraising ability that I've obtained over these many years.
Right.
And I got a job as the head of development outside of Boston at the Addison Gallery in Andover. And I will say that probably after the third week of being there, I realized, this is not... being in an art museum and not being in the curatorial or larger role of that, but being responsible for making sure that the electricity stays on, and it's actually a little bit less satisfying and more torture than I could have anticipated. But I stayed. I worked there for 3 years, raised money for a new building. I was part of the leadership team that made the determination of what the path of the museum was in a decision-making capacity, and very, very fulfilling, very hard work. But really, all along, I thought I want to be doing more, or something slightly different. And part of that had to do with the Addison had a really great visiting artists program, and William Wegman, the artist, came in, and we were having such interesting conversations about his work. And did
he bring his dogs with him?
He did. Yeah, he brought his dogs. So he had a residency, and part of what he did for the project was that Andover is right next to Lawrence, Massachusetts. It's a great disparity of wealth. Lawrence was a capital of industry in the 19th century and then fell on hard times. And so we would get students from Lawrence high schools who would come in to the museum and meet with these artists, and maybe their household income was less than half the amount of William Wegman's cameras. And so my office was off of the galleries, and I could hear what was going on in the galleries. and Wegman was holding up his camera, and one of the students asked